may be watching in or will be in the future. Just to share, things are a little bit different today. We are piloting the opportunity of people contributing remotely. So one of our cabinet members today, Sarah Jones, is actually in the building, but we're trying out the technology. So Sarah, I can see you on the screen. Sarah will be joining us a little later, and also there will be other contributors, or certainly one other contributor remotely to the will be contributing to the agenda. Can I thank the work that's gone in by Democratic Services Committee to pull the stops out trying to get this technology working, or this opportunity to remote access, get that opportunity up and running. I know there's a lot of work gone on to get it here. Now we know that there will be teething problems and it may not work very smoothly, but we're trying it today, and you know, practice makes perfect, and we will get this working very well. It may be a dream, let's hope so. I'm sure with all technological advances there can be hiccups, so let's leave it at that. So can I introduce myself, Peter Fox, leader of the council. I'll ask my cabinet colleagues to introduce themselves.
Phil Murphy, cabinet member for resources.
Bob Greenland, deputy leader, responsibilities for enterprise.
Brian Jones, cabinet member for operations.
Penny Jones, cabinet member for social services, safeguarding and health.
Paul Jordan, cabinet member for governance.
Richard John, cabinet member for children and young people.
Sarah? Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself? Technical hitch. Sarah, can you hear me? Okay, right, well, that's Sarah. Okay, so can I ask opposition leaders to introduce themselves, please?
Linda Guthrie, leader of the Democratic Group.
Dimitri Trini, leader of the Labour Group.
Simon Howard, leader of the Independent Group.
Yeah, welcome all. Can I welcome visiting elected members as well? Thank you for coming today, and visiting officers. As we move through the reports, if there is an officer who wishes to join the table, please do so. And if you can find a vacant chair. Before we go any further, though, can I invite Rob to give us a little bit of insight or the rules on the remote access or whatever you want to provide yourself.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Robert Tranter, the Monitoring Officer here. Strictly speaking, Leader, the Constitution currently doesn't allow for meetings to be conducted remotely. So that is a potential problem. So if we're going to do this on a permanent basis, then we're going to need to change our Constitution. Bearing in mind today, this is a trial run, if you like. I think we're okay. There are members here to make the meeting core it, but we just need to be mindful of that. Yes. That if we're going to do this on a basis, technology here, we will need to change our Constitution. It was allowed by the measure remote attendance. I think I'll just leave it there, Leader. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that advice, Rob. Just for clarity, though, we have one cabinet member who's contributing remotely, and obviously we ask for a vote to be taken at each report. How does that affect Sarah's voting capacity?
Yeah. Can I suggest that we only count the votes of those people present in the meeting? Okay. It's fine for Councillor Jones to contribute to the debate and to take a full part in that debate, but can I ask that you only vote as members of the cabinet who are physically here today? Okay, please.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Did you are you with us now, Sarah?
Yep, sorry about that. I had two windows open at the same time, but yep, I can hear loud and clear, but I can't vote, but I can contribute.
Thank you, and that's really clear. Thank you. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, so let's move on into the agenda, and the first is apologies for absence, and I think we have a full house today. Can I go on to declarations of interest? And that's any member in the room who feels they have an interest. Can they declare those now or raise them as they go? Linda.
Agenda item number 4, or number 3, 21st Central School Programme. I've got a daughter whose supply agency is teaching at Derryview School at the moment. She's got no ties with Monmouthshire at present, and so it's a personal interest.
Personal interest only, so that doesn't affect you from being here. Okay.
Just say, I'm not sure this is interest, but I'll declare it anyway. I went to Chapel School, same item, 21st Century School. I'm sure it's nothing, but
No, that wouldn't be a personal interest, Councillor Truly. No, just because you attended Chepstow Comprehensive School, that's not an interest per se.
And I would imagine for visiting members who may be associated with the school via governancy, there would be no pecuniary interest or
not personal or prejudicial, leader. If members are members of our governors rather of the schools covered by that report, that's a personal interest only. So you need to declare that as a personal interest. So if there are any members here who are governors of the schools mentioned in that report, then as long as you're LEA appointed governors, that's personal only. If you're a governor in another form, so for example, you're a parent governor at one of those schools, that will be personal and prejudicial. So you would need to leave the meeting.
Okay, that's good advice. So, Dave, did you want to?
I'm a governor of the school, but I know Councillor Dobie.
Yes, LEA appointed governor, Councillor Dobie, so that's personal only.
Personal, okay, so we can just write that you have to fill in the performer as well as declared it, so we'll make those available. Any other governors related to school?
Personal governor, school, children in another school, grandchildren in another school.
Thank you. Elise, you okay?
I'm not.
No, fine. Roger.
Governor of Derryview.
Okay. Okay, right. That's all of that. If you find anything else as we go through, just declare verbally, but you just fill in an appropriate performer afterwards. And there's no other. Debbie, any interest you wish to declare? Not a governor?
I have no interest to declare, no.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if you were a governor, that was all. Okay, right, so let's...
I am a governor, but not of those two areas.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so let's move on to item 3 in consideration of reports from select committees. None present today. And so we'll move straight into item 4 and little 1, and that's the funding for Caldicot Town Team Action Plan for 2017-18. Can I invite Councillor Phil Murphy, please?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And this is the second time that we've actually gone through this procedure. It seems to have worked pretty well the first time. This report is considering the allocation of Section 106 funding to the Caldicot Town Team based on the agreed schedule of projects and activities, and that's appended to this report at the end. And it's the Cabinet agrees to the allocation of 44,400 of that funding to enable the delivery of the activities and outcomes identified in the Town Team's Action Plan. The money that funds this is the Section 106 money that came as a consequence of the development in Caldicot, and the idea of that was to provide funds to enable the team, which was created for this purpose, to promote Caldicot and try and regenerate the rest of the town centre. So it's basically to develop the town centre and its businesses. And in September 16, as I said earlier, we did agree to move to an annual approval of funding so that they would be able to more nimbly and responsively apply themselves to opportunities that came along. And they developed a refreshed action plan for 17-18, The projects have been discussed with the Sevenside Area Committee and at the Lower Wye Area Committee, and it's proposed that, as in 16-17, the required funding of 44,004 to fund these activities is allocated and drawn down on a quarterly basis. The town teams carried out over the course of the year substantial public consultation through its own meetings and a local survey which receives over 450 responses, which in terms of that sort of survey is quite a substantial result. This money won't take all of the funding away. There will still be 55,046 remaining in the allocation, but that funding has got to be used by July 19. So I think this funding to allow these initiatives to go forward is certainly worth supporting. As I said, there is an action plan which follows this report, but it's important to point out that not all of this activity is exclusively funded through the Town Centre Development Partnership. Some is funded through local businesses or income that the town team themselves have generated. So just to sum up, Leader, this is the second tranche of funding that is enabling them to carry out their action plan.
Okay, many thanks. Jude, is there anything you'd wish to add?
I think Councillor Murphy's covered the key points. Thank you, Leader. I suppose really in terms of the content of the actual action plan itself, just to emphasise that essentially this year a continuation of what have been successful projects for the last 12 months. So, for instance, the Family Fun Day that the town team held in the summer had over 2,000 people coming to the town centre. The 999 Day at the Castle had over 4,500 people attend. So, looking at running those events again or similar. The pop-up shop was so successful that it the lease was taken by a permanent holder. They then moved to another shop, saying they had it again. So, yeah, the pop-up shop idea proved enormously successful in the town centre. So, it's essentially a continuation of those things that they've proven to have worked over the last 12 months.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, okay, colleagues, I'm going to open it up. Bob, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely in agreement with the report and the way it is proposed. There's just one issue that I would like to clear up. Cabinet has a legal responsibility as the executive to oversee any public funding. And as I see it, the report is proposing that the money will be overseen by the area committee with exception reporting only to Cabinet. And I do wonder whether that is sufficient, whether we should in fact have a more regular update of all spending as we are legally responsible for the spending of this money.
Okay, that's a good challenge. How have we reviewed or evaluated last year's project? Did it fall in? Well, as I hear the good news, and there is some fantastic news, how have we monitored the results against that similar plan last year?
Well, Lisa, from the report that came last year, the Sevenside Area Committee at that time was tasked with that monitoring role. Yeah. So as you may well be aware, the town team have attended there on a quarterly basis, providing partly kind of activity updates and describing the activity they've been doing, but the town team have also been drawing together outcome measures as well around footfall, around shop vacancy rates, actually looking at the outcomes for the town. I know they've reported some of that to the area committee also.
I think really relating to Bob, and I'm pleased that Sevenside are monitoring that well. That's appropriate and that's correct. But we actually have to, administer the money, if you like. What feedback could we expect back to Cabinet on that process? Should the Sevenside Area Committee be presenting an annual report, perhaps back to us as Cabinet?
Refer to colleagues around the legality of the process.
Yes. Go on.
was going to say, Leader, is if that's what you would like to happen, that's what can happen, and that's within your gift.
Can I just add, Leader, that I have absolute confidence in the way that this is being proposed to be done, and I know with officers overseeing it, it will be done. But it nevertheless remains the legal responsibility of Cabinet, being the executive, as I understand it, for the spending of this money. And I do think we need just to be more in touch with it than by exception reporting.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, can I invite you in, please? Hi, Sarah.
Hi, sorry, it was just a meeting. Yeah, sorry, Bob did raise the question I was going to ask around the feedback and evaluation, but I suppose just in continuing that theme, the action plan seems really solid, and I just wonder what opportunity there is for other areas and towns to learn from this action plan and perhaps take forward best practice where there is best practice from evaluation. So is that happening? Can that happen? I know Jude and the team have done an enormous amount of work in this area, and I think that's really starting to bear, fruits. And I think, the new CPT team has an opportunity here to take forward this sort of model and these sort of action plans further. My only other question really would be around, I think the funding has to be spent by 2019, so it was just around a reassurance around the ability that can happen to make use of those funds by that time frame.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Who would like to reflect on that? Jude, do you want to reflect any further?
I can offer some reflections.
Yeah.
In terms of the potential for connecting this work with other areas of the county, I know that the Colescott Town team have already made that connection with the Venue Town team who've been to visit, and they discussed at length some of the projects, and that's very much a two-way learning process. They learn from one another. And as Councillor Jones says, that going forward with the new partnerships team, there's more opportunities similarly to then spread that work across the county when that's appropriate. In terms of the longer term spend for that pot up until July 2019, that's obviously overseen by the Section 106 working group in a general sense. I know the town team have also discussed the possibility of drawing together some sort of workshop in the not too distant future to look at profiling the remainder of that spend right through to July 2019. So as I've discussed here, the main content at the moment is largely around a continuation of projects, but to actually look right through to the end of the time period to see if there are further things they need to be drawing in and to work with a range of stakeholders on that.
Thanks for that, Jude. I suppose one of the things we do need out of it, and I must say the town team do a cracking job. But they've really created vibrancy in the community and in Sevenside, certainly Caldecott itself. So my personal thanks go to all of those willing volunteers who do the graft, do the work, and they certainly have done there. But it's about, for me, is also about, well, what's the long-term sustainability of these projects? It's not just about spending 225,000 in a good way. It's actually having some long-term sustainable benefit. How do we see that continuing once that money is gone?
I know the town team have met with our strategic funding manager to actually look beyond the term of July 2019 to look at how they can transition from an organisation that has that allocation of Section 106 money to one that actually is sustainable in the medium to long term. And the fact that, as you'll see in the report, that already actually they are generating an income, that they are looking to private sector investment. They're not quite all the way there yet, but you would expect that at this point in time. But they are very much looking to put those steps in place to ensure that as an organisation and for the town, that those projects, that work can continue beyond that date.
Oh, that's great. No, well, we're pleased that foresight's been taken. Okay, other cabinet members, anyone wish to add?
Leader, I am worried about the scrutiny and of where the monies are going, and I do think it is very important that we at least have an annual report coming back to us. As Councillor Greenland says, ultimately it will be our responsibility, especially if something goes wrong. I'm sure it won't, and I'm totally in favour of continuing, but I do think it's important to scrutinise what is happening.
Okay. Right, nobody else has indicated. So can we, I'll move us to the recommendations then. but also we can add on the bottom of 2.2 that we would like perhaps the Sevenside committee or however we decide to do to give us an annual update of how things are going. And it's useful for that sharing that foresight as well of where things will go going forward. And like I said, some fantastic work gone on, and with so many enthusiastic people involved, we need to keep them infused and keep working with them to add even more value to the community. So okay, so the recommendations then are 2.1 that the Cabinet agrees to the allocation of 44,400 of Section 106 funding to Caldicot Town Team in quarterly instalments to enable delivery of the activities and outcomes as identified in the 2017-18 Town Team Action Plan, which is attached, and that the Sevenside Area Committee continue to review Caldicot Town Team's performance against spend and outcomes as outlined in the Town Team Action Plan, and if we can add that further report requirement to come to us in due course annually, so this time next year perhaps. Okay, all in favour of those recommendations? That's great, thank you very much. Okay, it moves on to the corporate plan and enabling strategies. And I'll just lead off on this and invite Kelly in to perhaps talk a little bit broader to it if she wishes. So the purpose of this report is to set out the approach and timescales for the development of a whole authority strategic plan or corporate plan, which will contain the medium-term financial plan and the various strategies which you'll see outlined further down the report. Whenever you get a new administration, there is an opportunity to relook at things, and we have an opportunity now with a five-year political term, and it's an opportunity for us to take stock and to review and evaluate and look at what's gone on and what needs to happen going forward, which will deliver the very best things for our communities and our residents within them. I suppose from a strategic policy perspective, over the past period, we have had a relatively stable situation. We had a single integrated plan, which is a key plank of our strategy. We also had the partnership agreement, which was coming together of views, which helped inform the political priorities going forward, and that was really important to have that strategic direction. So we had that stability in what is a very unstable period, as Kelly's alluded to in the report. I suppose the task now for any administration when it comes in and the council as a result will have to think about, well, what's it going to look like going forward? What's the corporate strategy going to be? How is it going to pick up everything? How is it going to pick up the well-being plan? And how is it going to pick up all of the various other issues? But importantly, that high-level political ambition. How do they convert that? And in our case, that was our Conservative manifesto, which we need to convert that into the policy, to create the policy direction of this council, obviously taking into account the key fundamental strands which are already out there and already underway, such as a well-being plan and other things, the things we know that are happening. We did in March of this year agree to a view on future Monmouthshire. The new administration, when it came in, could have decided to do something different on that, but they decided to embrace that and to continue the future Monmouth work, and that's identifying challenges as we know. We also heard many things on the doors, and we need to pay consideration to those as well. There's a raft of things that we need to have in place before we can perhaps get this plan totally enabled and include some of those other strategies around people, around digital and customers and assets, and the commercial and enterprise sides of things, as well as our new social justice and wellbeing areas that we're developing. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. As you'll see in 3.6, it references again the Future Monmouth work and Future Monmouthshire, and very clearly, if we want to maintain and carry on with creating sustainable and resilient communities, we do need to do things in different ways, as we identified in March, and we still need to move forward on that. So in 3.7, you'll see that our approach to building the framework for a corporate plan will include drawing on those political priorities which were articulated in our manifesto, and those other areas which I was reflecting on earlier, pulling together all of those things to create that important plan. So in short, the process surrounding building a corporate plan framework that sets out a clear direction and the resources required to deliver it will be a comprehensive and wide-ranging one, ensuring that related policies and toolkits are reviewed and brought into line with renewed purpose, priorities and ambitions. So you'll see there that Cabinet members, well, don't need to see it there, it's a fact, Cabinet members are already working hard within their directorates, with their chief officers, identifying and wrestling with some of those key emerging pressures and issues, so that we can create those sustainable and resilient communities as we move forward. So there's a lot of work going on. The reasons you'll see highlighted in 6.1. I would still always bring that third bullet point back to the top of the list, because, you know, ultimately the administration is driven by its political priorities, which are outlined in the manifesto, and that is, you know, whilst we have cognizance of everything else which has evolved, you know, that is a fundamental to any council where there is a political element. So below the report on Appendix 1, you do see a diagram there which sort of tries to fit some of these things together. Again, I challenge where that manifesto and the political priorities sit in that, but I know it's only indicative of the bits contributing in. I noticed, Kelly, in the report they talked about a slide deck, but I couldn't see that appended, not on my version. I don't know if it was in anybody else's.
I can supply
but that may have been useful for some people. So so that's basically it. We need to make this, need to create this corporate plan, this strategic document, and we would ideally like to have it in place in December, and so we do need some work to go on to get that all in place, but we have the various contributing ingredients to make it happen. So at that point I'll leave it there. Kelly, do you want to add further?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'm Kelly Byrne. I've forgotten my name plaque, but I do enterprise and governance. And I think what this report tries to set out is the governance infrastructure that's shaping up around our strategic planning frameworks. And those strategic planning frameworks are so key because they enable us to set out strategic direction. So clearly at this stage, this report does not set out political strategic direction. It just shines a light on the architecture that will allow us to actually shape and set out that direction at a point in the near future. And I think setting it out in this way is absolutely key to good governance. So the example I give is, instead of Cabinet and Council receiving a digital plan 1 week and then perhaps a people strategy 6 months later and then a corporate plan, it's to see that whole strategic family, if you like, as a whole, and to think about some of the connections, to think about some of the interrelationships, and to think about how we can create that better alignment, some of those clear synergies and some of those useful overlaps. So I'd draw your attention to 3.10, as you've already done so, Leader, which sets out the suggested timeframe in which these strategies will be brought forward. So obviously we'd start with the corporate, that strategic whole authority plan, which is essential in setting out that top level direction. And then some of the enabling plans that sit within that and underneath that will start to emerge thereafter. So I think, for me, this shows how all of those strategies inform and are informed by one another, how they're mutually reinforcing. And I think it's about making the process by which we will do this much more open, much more transparent. And it holds us to account, not for what we'll do, but more for the way in which we will do these things.
Okay, thank you. Okay, colleagues, anybody wish to add to this point? Obviously, we will be seeing it back in its full glory in December, and that will be, that will go to council won't it? This will go to council eventually.
It will have to go to council,
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
It's a key policy. Anyway, anybody, Sarah, anything you wish to add?
No, nothing from me.
Okay. So if that's it, then I'll move us to the recommendations. There's quite a lot to read out here, but I better have. Right, recommendations. The Cabinet approves a suggested framework for the development of a whole authority strategic plan or corporate plan, which will frame and contain the medium-term financial plan and inform the shape a whole set of enabling and delivery plans around people, digital, customers, assets and commercial, social justice and wellbeing and enterprise and economic development. And that the Cabinet agrees the timeframe set out in paragraph 310 in order to ensure that progress is made. And 2.3, the Cabinet commission an annual report to be reviewed by Audit Committee on the continued effectiveness of the Council strategic planning framework. Okay, all in favour of those three recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, let's move on to probably one of the, it is probably the most substantive item today on the agenda, and that is the 21st Century Schools programme and the strategic outline programme. Can I invite Councillor Richard John, please?
Thank you, Leader. 5 months ago today, we stood on a manifesto taking our secondary school building programme beyond Caldecott and Monmouth as part of a 4 secondary school strategy. Today we're starting a long journey to deliver on that commitment. We've already delivered one state-of-the-art, perhaps the most up-to-date secondary school in the entire country in Caldecott, and if there are councillors who haven't been to go and see it, I'd really urge you to go and see it. It's a fantastic school. It's innovative, it's environmentally friendly, it's transforming teaching methods at the school, and that's the sort of standard we want to deliver for every child, so every child in our county can learn in a safe, up-to-date, efficient and comforting environment. And also ensuring that every teacher has the best resources available so they can deliver a modern curriculum. Now, this afternoon I'm seeking Cabinet agreement for the Strategic Outline Programme, which sets out plans to redevelop King Henry VIII School as a 3 to 19 school, to increase Welsh medium provision for Ysgol Efenni to a 1.5 or a 2 form entry school on the current Derry View site. That's in Band B, and redevelop Chepstow School in Band C. Now, this is a big ambition, and we know that the authority has considerable financial challenges in the coming years, and based on the Welsh Government's draft budget, things may not get any easier. We know that the Welsh Government have now moved to a 50-50 ratio for funding, which is going to make this a massive challenge in funding another school. We also know that there's a risk of an impact on other areas of the council if we take this forward. So there are massive financial challenges. So a prioritisation exercise has taken place, and we feel the evidence is clear. The benefits of these proposals include addressing surplus places, ensuring that we meet Welsh medium demand, reducing the loss of students out of county, tackling deprivation and improving support for students who are eligible for free school meals. And we've talked at length in full council about the challenges we've got in ensuring that children who are eligible for free school meals have the same life chances as other students. And it's also going to remove the backlog of repair costs at King Henry VIII. Based on the 2016 condition reports, the case for King Henry VIII as the next school we build is compelling. Now, we've also considered the uncertainty in the Chepstow area, We know that the 7 tolls are being abolished next year, and the impact that's already having on the property market in the south of the county. So we don't know exactly what size school we need. We would be concerned that if we were to prioritise Chepstow over King Henry VIII, that we could be building a school in Chepstow tomorrow that would be a 5th smaller than it is currently, because we need to remove surplus places, and that could be totally unfit for purpose in 5 years' time. So those are some of the considerations that that we've been looking at, and it's all set out in the report. Now, we can't afford to do this alone, and we look to Welsh Government for funding. They're making their announcement later this month. And you'll see from the options appraisal at the back of this report that there are options to do this more cheaply. There's a range of options there. But we want to deliver the same sort of enormous sea change that we're seeing in Caldicot, a major investment in teaching methods that we feel can make a real difference to the life chances of those students, as well as bringing this range of flexible spaces to encourage community involvement and engagement there as well. Now, these exciting proposals have been through the cross-party 21st Century Schools Board, and also underwent detailed scrutiny from the Children and Young People Committee on the 14th of September, and there was considerable support for taking our school building plans forward. Now, of course, there's further work to be done before we get to the business case stage, and I listened very carefully to the views expressed in that committee of Councillor Thomas, who made some important points, I think, about immersion versus streaming in Welsh medium teaching, and we've obviously got time to give proper consideration to those. I've had numerous supportive messages from the Abergavenny area, including members of this council, and I've also received strong representations from Councillors Pavia, Brown and Dovey about the case for Chepstow School, and we've reflected carefully on their strong representations, and they make valid points about the repair backlog at Chepstow. The school needs a new boiler, there are some roofing repairs that are required, new carpeting, there are also some stained and damaged ceiling tiles, as well as other cosmetic works. So we recognise the remedial work that's needed there, and we are committed to redeveloping Chepstow in Band C, but we recognise that there's some remedial work that does need to be done in the near future to ensure that students in Chepstow continue to receive an excellent education. We are a small authority, and we remain one of the worst funded in Wales, but despite those challenges, I think we can be proud of the 2 new secondary schools we're delivering, as well as the updates that have been done in the past decade or so to our primary school estate. I was in Roggett Primary last week, and it's a fantastic school. It was built about 8 or 9 years ago, but that building is still making a difference to the education that young people there are receiving. So I recognise that the proposals we've got before us today are costly, but I believe they are a serious investment in the young people in this county that can make a difference to their life chances. So in conclusion, I look to Cabinet colleagues today to send a message to the Welsh Government that we remain committed to delivering a school estate that is fit for the 21st century. We've got a robust plan for Band B, we're ready for the challenge, and I hope the Welsh Government can endorse our proposals.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, this is a positive story. Education has always been a positive story in Monmouthshire when we started reorganising it from 2001, and it was something that all members of the council were involved with, and it spanned different administrations as well of different political colours, and we continued that emphasis on providing the best learning establishments as we could and as we could afford them, and we rolled out the primary sector. I think, you know, let's celebrate some of the good news. You know, the new school in Caldicot is just awesome. The new school in Monmouth will be awesome. All of our primary schools where they've had new builds, you know, are tremendous facilities, and we want to continue that. We've always been committed to replacing all of our substandard buildings. and that's something it's never left. That's something I hope even when I've left this council that will continue, because I think it's right. It's like you say, it's investing in the future. Can't always do everything that we want to do straight away, and we know that, and that's a challenge. I mean, and I look forward to seeing another new school in Abergavenny and a new school in Chepstow. I'm struggling to see where the finances are going to come forward from at the moment, because it is, as you talked about, the 50-50 is a big challenge, and we're still yet to get all of our receipts in to pay for what we're currently doing. So that is a massive challenge going forward. We hope that the Wales Government will recognise, and I'm sure they do, recognise the challenges that authorities are facing in trying to match fund these significant bills. I understand that we may be seeing a 4-year capital programme shortly, which will be helpful, but it'll give us an idea of what sort of monies will flow forward. But I do understand also that local government across Wales is certainly putting a significant ask on the 21st Century School Band B, probably one which will outstrip any monies which are available. So, that is going to be a challenge for any authority to meet their aspirations. So, let's be mindful that we've got to try and find the monies to do this. There are some challenges. I do want to reflect a little on, and I'm sure Will and Richard probably will want to come back in. Just want to touch on some of those very well made points by our local Chepstow members too, who've joined us today. I'm not sure if Paul has been managed to join us online. No, he couldn't make it. He couldn't quite connect, could he? Paul Pavia, member for Larkfield, was going to be joining us remotely because he got work commitments to share some of the strong views which have been held by the local members. We have had a detailed and significant response, a very well put together response by colleagues in Chepstow, which make the case for Chepstow School and challenge some of the various reports that we have used to get to this position today, and the strong views which have been held by the local members. Oh, Paul's in. Brilliant. A significant response, a very well put together response by colleagues here. Okay, Paul, welcome. Can you hear us? I'll give Paul a couple of seconds to get himself connected. Paul, can you hear us? No sound yet. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but we can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now. Well done. Welcome. Paul, thanks for joining us remotely. This is the first time we've done this, and for you to be contributing to such an important agenda is a real test for it. But I'm pleased you've managed to tune in. I was just going to reflect on your contribution as from the Chepstow members, and I was just commenting how comprehensive it was. And in fairness to you and your colleagues and the work which you put in there, I would like Will and perhaps Richard to reflect on some of those salient points, but perhaps after you've had an opportunity, I wonder, as you're connected now, and I don't want to lose this opportunity, I'm going to invite you perhaps first to contribute for other cabinet members, and then I'll be bringing Dimitri in, who's also indicated he would wish to speak on this item. I'll bring you in just in case we lose you. So perhaps you could contribute now, if you would.
Yeah. Can I thank you, Cabinet Leader, for allowing me to address the Cabinet, and obviously can I thank the Cabinet Member for Education for his presentation. You've already, as you've already alluded to, you've received the letter, so I'm not going to go through it verbatim, but just highlight some of the issues that were addressed in there by myself, Councillor David Dudley and Councillor Louise Brown. And firstly, we were really concerned about the lack of consultation developing the SOP, not only with us as the local elected members, but with the Chepstow School cluster as a whole. We were alerted to the proposals in the SOP very late in the day, after the submission had already been made to Welsh Government, which we felt was extremely unfortunate. And the process has generated a significant level of uncertainty for the cluster, as well as pupils and parents. And that perception is that no active steps have been taken to mitigate that uncertainty. I listened to what the Cabinet Member for Education said, that they've started that process, but it doesn't seem to be reflecting on the ground. In terms of the fabric, they're going through the different condition surveys that were generated in both 2009 and by Welsh Government last year. There does seem to be a discrepancy between the two. I'd be very interested to hear what the Cabinet Member responsible and the Chief Officer responsible will have to say about that. The Cabinet Member for Education did say or allude to some remedial works that needed to be done. These are not small scale remedial works. These are sizable works which will require addressing in the next probably 3 years. The issue about the boiler, there are issues in regarding to the front of the building, the front fabric of the building, which may well compromise the functionality and the safety of the building over the next 3 years. That needs to be addressed urgently. And as I've alluded to in the letter, the issue that Chepstow School has and continues to invest its own money, diverting it from teaching and learning resources into the upkeep of the building, I don't think has been reflected in the surveys that, particularly the last Welsh Government survey by Faithful and Gould. The last issue there in the letter was regarding safeguarding and the issue of whether or not other options have been looked at to potentially relocate a new secondary school with the Dell. I understand that some commissioned work has been undertaken with Cornerstone, and I'd be interested to hear what some of those outcomes of that work was. I understand the issue of surplus places. It's not just an issue for this county, but it's an issue for across Wales. And Abergavenny does have a slightly more higher surplus issue than we have in the south. But deciding a school's future, I don't think cannot be simply an open and shut case based on data on surplus places. I think performance needs to be taken into account, and Chepstow's performance, both academically and financially, over the past 4 years has been exceptional, given the challenges that it has to face locally. There are strong pockets of deprivation, as well as the pulls from Wydeen, and now we'll see probably pulls from 2 brand new facilities in Caldicot and Monmouth when it's going to be finished in the very near future. I think the issue needs to be looked at in the round. The surplus place challenge is more nuanced than what is set out here, and I think a holistic review of catchments and then the focus on primary schools, I think, is the main issue when it comes to surplus places. In terms of Welsh language policy, I mean, we've got real concerns here about this. As we've alluded to, that the drive to stimulate improved demand for Welsh medium language provision in the county is laudable and is welcome, but that stimulation has to come from the primary sector. We're concerned the changes in the WESP that have been issued before you in the next item are not only unrealistic but unworkable. Moreover, the new changes that have been made in regard to relocation of Ysgol Ifenny and the dual streaming of the secondary school has not been properly consulted on. You know, it hasn't been done with the Council's Welsh Language Forum group, and it hasn't been consulted, you know, beyond that. So, you know, I really don't know how we, as three councils putting these representations forward, can see this can be accepted. You know, and finally, in terms of the, as I alluded to in the letter, known unknowns in relation to the development, or which potentially will happen with the reduction of the tolls and the removal of the tolls next year. You know, to recategorise on the basis the council has made no formal assessment of what the consequences of the removal of the tolls might be. You know, as I said, it's not only a political fudge, but it's preempted in any local development plan review will earmark substantial development somewhere between Chepstow and Caldicot, and that's not the case. You know, that development potentially will happen right across the M4 corridor and in other parts of Monmouthshire. So I think to say, well, you know, we've got to go for Abergavenny because we're not sure what's going on in the south, it's just ludicrous. You know, you cannot look at this in isolation. So, you know, those are our concerns. You know, the lack of stakeholder engagement, and, you know, in all good conscience, I can't see how you can accept these proposals that have been put forward in front of you today. Thank you.
Very much, Paul. Thanks for that. Came over really clearly, so we captured all that. I'm going to obviously there's lots of people who will want to speak. And perhaps it'd be right and proper actually if I invite Dimitri, if we can cut back you bank those points and we'll reflect on those. I'm going to invite Dimitri, who's also indicated you want to speak, to reflect further, and we can capture those points, and then I'll invite cabinet members to come in. But we will then look at those points. I don't want to get away from the celebration of building new schools as well, but I hear the noise about Chepstow, and quite rightly so. So, Dimitri.
Yeah, I'd like to start off with just saying, you know, we want Abergavenny to go ahead. You know, we've always been told since I've been on this council, it would be two-comp strategy: two first, Caldicot and Monmouth, and then Abergavenny, Chepstow to follow. So this is a shock that Chepstow won't come with Abergavenny. So it's not, I don't see it as an either-or argument. It should be both, in my view. And I'm deeply disappointed that there was no consultation on this, and that I only just learnt now from Paul that it was submitted before we also knew, which is terrible. Like local members, local Conservative members, but Labour members as well. And I represent the area with over 30% child poverty in Boreham, and to be told that their school could potentially, I looked it up, not be built till 2029 is a big, huge blow for Chepstow. And as Councillor Pavia has just articulated very well, to say that, you know, it's going to be very unpredictable in the future, well, yeah, the future is unpredictable. There's a clue that, you know, we can't ever possibly know. Chepstow needs a school now to compete with the Wydeens. I know Abergavenny has to compete with Hereford and sort of Monmouth, but Chepstow competes almost every day with Wydeen. Kids are bused from Undy, Mega, Roggett, Caldicot even going to Wydeen. So Chepstow needs to be rebuilt now to compete with its neighbours across the border. And I appreciate that, you know, you don't know about housing developments, but we're in charge of the LDP. We're the ones that can control. I know we don't control when developers bring it forward, but we're in charge of the LDP, so surely we'll have a good idea of probably the best guess of what housing is going to be brought forward. So we'll have a very good stab at knowing what places we'll need for Chepstow School. And I genuinely think there's a missed opportunity for this council for the first comprehensive as you cross the bridge. Not developed, not to be 21st century, is a bad sign for this county, a very bad sign. And I just can't believe, why were we not consulted? All members, not only the Chepstow members, but all members. And secondly, on the lack of provision on the tolls and the LDP, why can't we give a good start? Why can't we have a good guess of what places we'll need? Why is it so unpredictable? We're in charge of housing.
Okay. Thank you, Dimitri. Perhaps I'll invite Will in to reflect on some of the points before I bring cabinet members in. But you know, and I understand your views, Dimitri, and I would expect you to make them. But you know, you're a leader of a Labour group. You could have been leader of the council if it had gone your way, and you would have realised that the financials of how they sit within your own Wales government and what their expectation is and what sort of money they're going to flow forward, and their requirement that any plan we put forward would be robust and it would stack up and it would be reasonable. At the moment, as you quite rightly said, wouldn't it be right to get the LDP the LDP to drive us? Yeah, exactly. That's why Bob is going to be leading an LDP earlier than normally, because we obviously need to try to answer some of those issues about what are we going to be requiring going forward. So I think absolutely that is the case. We need to understand it. You can't just build a school on a thought, a guess, a guesstimate, the potential of this, or it might be that. You can't. You do need to do the groundwork to understand it. And Wales Government would expect our strategic outline programme to be robust and evidenced strongly. And the evidence we have at the moment is strongly falling in favour that it is the King Henry VIII-ish school that should move forward first. Our ambition and aspiration is for 4 new ones, just as you started out. And indeed, when we first started many years ago with 90 million quid or whatever it was in the budget, we thought we might be able to do 4 on that. We soon found that that wasn't going to be the case. So that aspiration, that commitment has not gone away, and we will very much want to advance it. We want to build the right school in the right place, and that might need us to reflect on our future primary sector as well, significantly. If we have a lot of houses come in the area on the M4 corridor, wherever, there is still a need for us and in Monmouthshire to probably will be able to review our primary stock. There's a lot that needs to happen. I'm going to invite Will perhaps to pick up some of the points, because I think you crossed some of the points, Paul's and your own, and let's try to give some some strong responses to these points, because we need to be clear, and I absolutely understand the need for local residents, local councillors to make their points. I would be also in this case. However, we are tasked with making a decision on the back of reasonable and strong evidence that we have at this time, and that's what we're in a position of doing. And I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that we need to go back and revisit what we have before us. We have relatively new documentation commissioned by others, which lays out some of the key fundamentals, and we know some of those other unknowns, which we will get to understand more over the next couple of years through the LDP process. Will, can you pick up on some of those key points, please?
Thank you, Leader. Will McLean, Chief Officer for Children and Young People. I'm grateful to Councillor Pavia for his providing me with an outline of his concerns prior to today, which will hopefully enable me to address them, and I'll hopefully take them in the order that he raised them prior to addressing those concerns raised by Councillor Petruni. In the first instance, the concern around the consultation. The timelines for this have been very tight with Welsh Government, and we had to respond to them on the 31st of July. We did so clearly indicating that this was not a submission that had been agreed by councillors, and we have tried to ensure that it's gone through the full political process here. So it has been taken through Children and Young People's Select Committee, and it had a good airing there. There was an extended debate and discussion about it at that meeting. And we've gone on to reflect on some of those discussions that we had on the 14th of September. Obviously, the papers have been prepared and shared with members prior to today as well, to ensure that that's been given the proper opportunity for scrutiny. We've also provided Councillors Brown, Dovey and Pavia with all of our working documentation, which establish how the figures that are cited in the Cabinet report were arrived at, in order to helpfully provide some further evidence to what we assert in the covering paper. I've also recently visited and met with a group of governors and the head teachers from Chepstow School, and I will meet with the primary cluster governors in the near future. It is important that we recognise where we are in this process. This is our strategic outline submission to Welsh Government. It is setting out our strategic case. There was a huge amount of work to do as we assessed the viability and the fundamental aspects of the full business case as we take it forward, understanding the exact level of demand and so on within the parameters that we've set out, but also understanding the challenges that the two sites predict, which we will have to use in Band B. The point was made earlier about some of the cost escalation and the pressures that we've seen. When I went back to our original strategic outline plan of 2010, our original Band A submission was to spend £80 million. When I saw that, I kind of thought, well, actually, we've arrived at about £90 million expenditure in Band A. So actually, in such a significant area of spend, that's relatively close in terms of expenditure, used relatively. When we looked in more detail at what we had submitted, I think it really drew, and what became apparent was the level and the extent of cost escalation and our ability to plan for the future. So our original SOP identified £40 million to be spent on primary schools in Band A, £10 million on leisure facilities and £35 million on secondary schools. Clearly, we have seen huge movement away from that position. So I think this opportunity now to look back and refresh and understand the conditions we were in was really important. The other point is just to make that all of the costings and so on have been set using Welsh Government guidance. Welsh Government have been very clear this time about how we cost any suggested projects. It's based on pupil numbers multiplied by a square area requirement under BB 98, the government's own published requirements for school buildings, and then multiplied by a per metre cost, which they have set. So these are not figures which have been calculated by us or anybody else. These are set by Welsh Government. So if I go through the points that Councillor Pavia made, the first one about the state of the building and the condition surveys. The condition survey that Welsh Government, and we make this point on the top of page 25, I think, in the covering report, the Welsh Government were very clear that the Faithful and Gould surveys that they commissioned would be the condition surveys that they would use to undertake their assessment of Band B. When they wrote back to us as a local authority, they said, this data contributes significantly to the evidence based on education buildings in Wales and forms a vital part of our strategic planning and investment, and will be used to help produce our strategic outline case for Band B of the 21st Century Schools and Education Programme. So clearly they are reports that Welsh Government have commissioned, and we have no reason to doubt their technical accuracy or the validity of what they are producing. And they've been the same for every single authority and every single school in Wales. Councillor Pavia then goes on to make or to include a note then in his submission that the school has been spending its own money, which is diverted from teaching and learning. All of our schools receive funding for maintenance through the year. On average, over the last 3 years, Chepstow has received circa £60,000 in its delegated budget. According to our records of spend, the most they have spent in any one of those years is £43,000. So we do delegate funds for maintenance, and schools take decisions on where they choose to spend that. So certainly, from my perspective as Chief Officer, I don't have any evidence to suggest that the school has invested above and beyond what we have delegated to them through our budget formula. If that evidence does exist, then obviously we would be keen to see that. The surveys, the point then is made around how we understand how the surveys were assessed. The surveys were done to a set technical approach, and that was agreed by the Welsh Government. Councillor Pavia then goes on to raise the concern around some safeguarding issues, particularly between the leisure centre and the school. He notes in his full submission that that needs to be addressed by the council going forward. That matter was raised by the school with me on Monday evening. If there is a significant safeguarding issue, we will address that immediately. We don't let safeguarding issues drift into the near future, so that will be undertaken straight away. With regards to Cornerstone, which is raised a little bit later in Councillor Pavia's input today, but is adjacent to this point in his letter, Cornerstone were commissioned by the authority to look at the potential for development in both Abergavenny and Chepstow, as we were looking at both sites, obviously considering them within our Band B prioritisation exercise. That work is draft. It is still subject to ongoing discussion and development between senior officers in the authority and Cornerstone themselves. We met with Cornerstone on the 27th September to discuss those matters. There are a number of challenges within the Cornerstone work that we want them to go back and have another look at. Some of the assumptions in terms of planning, again, in terms of development opportunities and so on, need to be reviewed. And it wouldn't be right to share those in the public forum until we are content that we can share those with a higher degree of confidence in the numbers than we have now. The one point that is made is that did we consider a 3 through 19 model in Chepstow, taking the Dell into the upper school and releasing the land at the Dell for future development? We did consider that, and Cornerstone did look at that, and there is not sufficient capacity on the Chepstow site to allow that to take place, according to the work that's been undertaken by Cornerstone. With regard to surplus places, I think the point around there are slightly more surplus places in the Abergavenny cluster is to slightly understate it. There are nearly 18.68% surplus places in the Abergavenny cluster compared to 14% in the Chepstow cluster. If we look at the secondaries alone, the secondaries, King Henry VIII has 24.9% surplus places, whereas Chepstow has 18.8%. The Welsh Government target for surplus places is 10%, and if we were to look at the primary cluster in Chepstow, I think they're at 10.2% in terms of their surplus places. So actually, the provision of primary places in Chepstow is pretty near where we would be looking to plan to. In terms of Councillor Pavia's points around the challenges that Chepstow faces, those challenges are not unique to Chepstow. Abergavenny is also a border town. It happens to be a border with Powys, but we see significant loss of pupils to Crickhowell from the Abergavenny cluster. In past years, they have been equivalent and very close to the number that we have seen lost to Wydene in Chepstow. Not only that, we see very, very significant numbers of pupils lost at post-16 level to Hereford College. So those challenges which Councillor Pavia rightly identifies as being challenges for us with our 4 schools in the 4 corners of our county are similar in the north of the county as well. I would offer one observation, I think, that it is more than a building in terms of what encourages parents to choose the school that their children attend. We're very fortunate in Monmouthshire that we have a cohort of parents who are very engaged and committed to their children's education, and they make their choice on a wide parameter of perspectives, not simply the state of a building. Moreover, the point around the need for an urgent review of catchment, the pressures around catchment are most acutely seen in Abergavenny compared to Chepstow. Our catchment areas were reviewed in 2015. That was considered by Cabinet in March 2015, and the decision was taken not to progress any changes at that time. So I think that catchment is something which we will have to come to look at when we review particularly the primary provision in Abergavenny, but more generally across the board, they are nuanced arguments around the edges of catchment as opposed to anything fundamental. If I go on to now the points that Councillor Pavia raises with regards to the Welsh language policy, there are a number of points I think that I'd just like to raise with regards to this. I know Sharon will repeat some of these when we consider the next paper. It is inherent and apparent from the conversations that we had with Aled Roberts that one of the key issues for him in terms of our current West was a lack of ambition in terms of us really generating and pushing for more numbers of learners through the medium of Welsh. We believe that we are addressing that through this proposal. The WESP is inherently flawed as a strategic planning tool because it is statutorily capped at 3 years, which is not long enough to give us an opportunity to document what our aspirations are for the future in that medium to long term. But clearly that is what we are seeking to do in the current WESP, but it can only be for the life of that WESP by its very nature. I'm unsure as to Councillor Pavia's comments with regards to us not seeking to develop places in the north and the south of the county. Just within the last year, we have had to take action in Ysgol-y-Fenni to provide more capacity. We have taken and transferred a Flying Start provision, moved that into Derry View to enable the school to have more space for its current intake. We know that it will reach capacity in 2019-20, and again, we'll have to look at it then if we have not determined a suitable way forward. The school in the south of the county, Ysgol-y-Fyn, currently has circa 25% surplus places. Notwithstanding that, we've made a clear commitment in our WESP that we will develop that school if that demand occurs in the future. So even if they were to take and fulfil those 25% of surplus places they have, we have committed to developing the school to ensure that they can accommodate any additional requirement. We are also working with the school to ensure that groups such as Kilch and the Maithrin are able to be placed in the school in order to grow demand locally, as that is what we see as being a key driver for that. In terms of the consultees, I believe that we have kept the forum informed. We went through a significant consultation exercise prior to its submission to Welsh Government in December 2016. It was approved by Cabinet in January of this year. We've kept them informed of the fact that there is an ongoing dialogue with Welsh Government with regards to the status of the WESP. The WESPs were submitted en masse by that date to Welsh Government, so all 22 authorities submitted. Welsh Government at that point determined that they did not meet their aspirations for what they wanted to see the future of Welsh education in Wales to be. At that time, they commissioned Aled Roberts, former AM from Wrexham, to undertake a rapid policy review across Wales. He's undertaken that work. We have engaged with him fully with that. We have engaged with Welsh Government officials fully throughout the process. And as soon as we have concluded that, with your decision this afternoon, we will go back to the forum to advise them on the changes we have undertaken at the behest of Welsh Government. There are also some points raised about the validity and the acceptability, I guess, in terms of the Welsh stream as opposed to an immersion offer. That's something which I'm sure Sharon will touch on when she discusses this in the next item. But I think what we are talking about is the opportunity for children to have an immersive Welsh language experience in their primary school stage. The evidence suggests that they will be fully fluent in Welsh by the time they leave primary school, having experienced that. And they will then go on to secondary to continue to learn through the medium of their choice. In this instance, we are presuming that to be Welsh. One of the great challenges for all Welsh medium schools is that children will tend to converse in their first language in the school. So if I am educated through the medium of Welsh, but I live in an English-speaking home, when I break from my lessons, I'm likely to converse in English. It's a challenge for Welsh medium schools as it would be for a Welsh stream in a school. As with any Welsh medium setting, and we're seeing this right across Wales, and it's a challenge which Welsh Government, I think, are acutely aware of. There will be challenges around how we recruit and retain the necessary teachers who are enabled to provide that education through the medium of Welsh, but we are not unique in that. And we will work with colleagues right across South East Wales and more broadly across Wales to ensure that the recruitment process for Welsh medium teachers is as successful as it can be. I think just to touch on another couple of aspects, Councillor Pavia notes that he believes the proposed option might work in some places where there is a greater level of Welsh language. He cites West Wales as an example. I believe we could cite schools such as Craiga on the outskirts of Cardiff, or Treorchy in the South Wales Valley, where dual stream schools have been effective. And Welsh Government are currently citing those as examples of good practice as they deliver their considerations back to local authorities. The final point raised by Councillor Pavia around our ability to predict those unknowns in the south of the county. I think when the Welsh Government are clearly looking for an investment proposal that meets their priorities, And when we're looking at how we can reduce the number of surplus places, given that we understand that there is, and we've seen anecdotal already increased demand for housing in the southeast corner of the county, given that we know that there is an aspiration and a need to have a new local development plan in 2021, it did strike us as being, we would be progressing with a set of assumptions that we would not be able to validate as yet. In terms of the developments that we know are taking place, all of those have been fully accounted for, and we gave those full evidence of those to members when they requested those. We set out how we do that calculation of what proposed new builds are and how they then feed into our assumptions for school demand in any given area. I hope that covers off everything that Councillor Pavia had raised. And I suspect and hope that I've addressed the points that Councillor Baccioni made while making those comments.
Okay, thank you, Will. I mean, you have, you've worked through the big salient points there, and I thank you for giving that detailed response. And you know, I doubt that all of that is consolation to members from the Chepstow area. I absolutely understand that. I'm going to invite further cabinet members to contribute, and Richard, then you can wind up if you wish, and I'll move us to the recommendation. Bob?
Yes, first of all, Will, can I thank you for addressing those points which were very important to address, that were made by both Councillor Baccioni and Councillor Pavia. First of all, I'd just like to speak about the LDP process. It's impossible at this stage, at the very start of looking at reviewing the LDP, to know what the outcome is going to be in 2 years' time. Otherwise, why would we do it in the first place? We'd have all the answers. We clearly haven't got the answers, and there are external factors such as the migration from Bristol coming in. We don't know when equilibrium on that is going to be reached. We don't know how many houses might be coming up, and so it would be impossible to even take a guess, frankly, at this stage, at the requirement for housing and further industrial land in the south of the county. I became involved with the 21st Century Schools issue some years ago. And I remember quite clearly spending an August going around all our secondary schools, and the condition reports that we've seen coming through are exactly in line with what we saw, 5 or 6 years ago. There was no doubt that Caldicot was in worst condition. There was no doubt that Monmouth came a close second, and then Abergavenny, and there was no doubt that Chepstow was in the best condition of that time. It is undoubtedly the case that with the uncertainties that are around Chepstow at the moment, it would be foolish to build a school which the Welsh Government would insist is based on the known numbers going forward. They wouldn't allow us to do anything else. And for us then, as Councillor Councillor John pointed out, to do that and then find that we were well short of the numbers required in a few years' time would be foolish. And that needs to be an important consideration. But the other thing to consider is this, that when we started out on this, this project, we were originally informed by Welsh Government that they would be supplying 70% of the funding, we would have 30%. Before we got to finalising Band A, that had changed first of all to 60-40 and then eventually to 50-50. And we recognised that actually to be able to do the other two schools in Band B would require Welsh Government going back to a 70-30 split, and representations were made on that point. I'm not criticising Welsh Government, we're all under pressure, and we are where we are. But it has had the effect that inevitably our original plans, as we would have liked to have done them purely on a financial basis, are simply not achievable anymore. And we have to be realistic about that. I mean, to be perfectly honest, we haven't even secured the money for the proposals that we've got for Abergavenny at the moment. We have a priority. I'm sure other cabinet members would agree that our priority is to make the money available for this school. But it's not an easy ask even to get the money for that. So I do understand the issues in the south. I represent a southern ward whose children go to Chepstow School. I recognise the issues, but I'm afraid that having heard all I've heard and having the very good explanations we've heard from Will McLean just then, I personally think that the proposals that we're making now are just and sound.
Phil.
Yeah, thank you, leader. And Bob's just said most of what I was going to say, but my ward also sends children to Chepstow School. And I'm as upset as anybody at the fact that we're unable to include Chepstow in the Band B. But my overriding concern is that I don't want to see us provide something inferior to other areas. It'd be far better to, as long as we keep the standard of the buildings up. So, you know, enhanced maintenance may well be something that we need to be looking at. But I would far rather take a little bit longer over delivering the same standard of building than to take the other option, which is a real hodgepodge, which won't do Chepstow or Abergavenny any favours at all. So it's with a heavy heart I have to support the inclusion of Chepstow in Band C, but it is the only answer to the problem as I see it.
Okay, Phil, other cabinet members? Richard, is there? Oh, sorry, Paul.
I was going to just say shortly, I mean, it's interesting that we're talking about 21st Century Schools programme, and today we're using 21st century technology for the first time by this system, and hopefully we'll be able to take full advantage of it in the future, subject to the amendment of any constitution. We have to make a decision today on the basis of the evidence that we've seen. There's only one decision we can make, and that is to proceed with it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Richard, is there anything you want to wind up on?
Yeah, I think Mr McLean addressed most of the points that Councillors Parry and Bethune made, and I thank them for their contributions. They made some really important points that we do need to consider as we move forward to future stages. As I said at the start, we're at a very, very early stage in these talks, and we talked about the challenges for Chepstow, and indeed there would be a challenge for whichever secondary school was going to be fourth. There was always going to be an additional challenge for that school, and it's actually a good problem to have that we've only got one secondary school in the entire county that isn't brand new and state of the art. Of course, we want every school to have those facilities that many of us have seen in Caldecott, and we're committed still to a 4-school strategy. We've talked about the financial challenges we've got, and you know, I heard the point you made well, Dimitri, that you want both schools done and you want Chepstow built tomorrow. But although you look at the funding, and if it was 70-30 as the Welsh Government set out initially, we might be in a stronger position financially. But actually, even if we had the money here ready, waiting to go, would we give the green light to build a new school in Chepstow, given the enormous uncertainty about the size school we need in the next few years? I think it would be grossly irresponsible to build a school tomorrow that would take out a fifth of the school places and then find in 5 years it's completely unfit for purpose. We would have wasted public money. I think we need to see exactly what the impact of the abolition of the 7 tolls is next year. We know that there's already increasing demand for housing in the Chepstow area, so I strongly feel that we must proceed with these plans today. We remain committed to 4 secondary schools. I hope that when we do build Chepstow in Band C, that will be ready at the opening stages of the of that envelope. So we're not looking as far as 2029. But we've got some real challenges here, and I think we actually need to celebrate the investment we have made and the difference, the very real difference that this is going to make to the life chances of young people in our county, because it's really significant.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard, and I want to leave it on that note as well, about celebrating what this council has achieved and what it still continues to want to achieve. We're never moved away. We're not moving away from our 4 school strategy. We want 4 fantastic schools which are absolutely in the right places and the right shape to meet the needs going forward. On the basis of the information we have at the moment and the finances that we have at the moment, there is only one solution to go forward. I thank Paul and David and Louise particularly for the work they put in on their submission, and that is a strong submission which stays on file. We recognise those concerns, and thanks for making those points so strongly. I absolutely understand the need to do that and how passionate you are about that. But hopefully, we as a collective, as a council, can celebrate the fantastic work that we've done in education going forward. Being one of the smallest authorities in Wales, we've just nearly finished 2 state-of-the-art, probably the most advanced learning environments in the UK, certainly in Wales, and we want to add to that with 2 more. We've got to wait a bit for the last piece of the puzzle. We know that, but we've got to get it right, and that's the key thing. So I'm going to move us to the recommendations in 2, and that is that it is recommended that Cabinet members in 2.1 agree the rationale for selecting the 3 schools in the Abergavenny cluster to be the focus for change and development in Band B of the Welsh Government's 21st Century Schools programme, and in 2.2 to agree to the Chepstow cluster being developed in Band C of the 21st Century Schools programme, and in 2.3 to agree to the submission of the proposal as set out in Appendix 1 to Welsh Government for consideration in the first stage of the Band B process. Can I all in favour of that? Thank you very much. That's carried. Can I thank you, members, for your contributions on that part? I know Councillor Green has to leave us at this point, and I will now move us on to the next report, and that is the Welsh in Education Strategic Plan. Again, Councillor Richard John.
Thank you, Leader. Following on from our previous discussion, members are asked to endorse this strategic plan for Welsh in education, which includes the authority's commitments to contribute to the Welsh Government's target of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. Now, our West proposal set out plans to increase the proportion of 7-year-olds learning through the medium of Welsh, more learners improving their skills on the transfer from primary to secondary school, more Welsh medium qualifications being studied, more 16 to 19-year-olds studying both Welsh and also other subjects through the medium of Welsh, and also more learners more generally with improved Welsh language skills. Now, a key plank for this commitment is our Band B proposal, which includes plans to increase our Welsh medium primary capacity by 50%, and also create secondary Welsh medium provision for the first time in the county, which is going to help keep more students within Monmouthshire. Now, I recognise the Welsh Government's programme to increase Welsh medium provision and aim for 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, but I strongly feel that at a local level we must balance this with parental preference, and by adopting these proposals we're giving parents greater choice and greater preference about where they send their students for their education. So I recommend this report.
Okay, Sharon, would you like to add?
Very comprehensive approach, thank you very much. Certainly this is the 3rd WESP that we've been required to submit from the local authority. really for the first time, Welsh Government have been very clear about their aspiration and expectation for the level of Welsh speakers they need to see by a certain time. There is a recognition that Monmouthshire is indeed a border county, and possibly we have a few more challenges than other authorities within Wales in really securing a commitment from parents to choose Welsh medium education for their children. As Will alluded to earlier, all of the WESPs were submitted and we have had feedback and amended our WESP document, which is the one you have before you today, accordingly to reflect that aspiration. And the last piece of the jigsaw really is, as was discussed earlier with the Band B proposal. The aspirations are suitable for us over the 3-year period. It is really clear and evident that the 3-year period is not long enough for us to articulate where we need to be and how we will achieve our contribution to that million Welsh speakers. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that within the Directorate and the authority we don't have that aspiration and can't articulate that in the correct forum.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Can we be clear, what do they define as one of the million Welsh speakers? What level of Welsh? Is that fluent Welsh?
It would be lovely to have an absolutely specific definition. However, it is a working level of Welsh language. So, for example, there are lots of benefits to being bilingual, and that's well evidenced in research. If you learn a language when you're very young and you can speak more than one, you learn a second, a third, a fourth far easier. But cognitively as well, that supports your learning and your development generally. If, as a young person, you decide that you want to pursue your career in Wales, and hopefully we will keep all our best people here as much as we can, you will need to be able to converse at least at a working level within your working environment to some degree in the Welsh language. And building that capacity and that within our young people will give them that real opportunity going forward to do the things they want to do and to live where they want to live.
Thanks, but I just want to sure what the the definition was. I've got some way to go then. Okay. Colleagues, anybody wish to add further? Also, we've covered a lot of this in the previous report. Anything further? Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment really that in the previous round we said that we were expecting people to come in from England with the closure that the tolls being taken away. We're expecting people to come from England into Monmouthshire, and I'm just wondering what effect this will have if they think, oh my God, we've got to learn Welsh, or whether parental choice will in fact take over. I know that some will embrace it, but many won't. Will this be off-putting to those we expect to come over? I don't know. I'm just asking.
In our experience, it's very mixed. Parents will move into the area and some will request English medium education, but we find that quite a lot have made the decision to come to Wales and want to fully participate in the language and the culture, and therefore they will request a place in a Welsh medium school. At the moment, we've only got a few children who are placed that haven't started when they were in reception, and schools provide immersion training to enable them to participate and to gain language quickly. It's about 6 months before they feel comfortable, but a lot longer if you want to be fluent. But nevertheless, it's interesting. Again, the benefits of learning more than one language is well known. And I understand that there are some areas of Birmingham who learn Welsh specifically as a second or a third language because they can come and practice here quite often. So, the language itself gives you the grammatical structure that you need, and therefore the ability to learn. So at the moment it's sort of half and half.
Any other colleagues? Okay, I'm going to take this as recommendations then, and that is in 221 to receive.
Leader, sorry, I think Sarah wants to
speak.
Sorry,
I'm very sorry, Sarah. Please, I forgot you were there.
Just very briefly,
shame on me.
In the budget yesterday, I noticed that there was a 10 million allocation for Welsh language. What that looks like, I don't know, but I think it's an important thing we need to be pursuing as to whether that might come to, whether it's education, but we need to get the detail on that. And I was just a very brief question around how WESPs will sit under the new Welsh Language Act. Clearly it's in white paper form at the moment. Have we got any direction around that?
Certainly when we constructed our draft WESP, we worked very closely with the Welsh language requirements for the local authority, and we ensured that they align completely and that deliver that aspect of work as well.
Okay, okay, right. Anybody else? No? Okay, so the recommendation then is in 2.1 to receive the Monmouthshire WESP 2017 to 2020 plan, and 2.2 to agree to the proposals and plans contained within the Monmouthshire's Welsh in Education Strategic Plan, including the potential expansion of Welsh medium primary and secondary education in the county. All in favour of those? Thanks very much. Okay, thank you, Sharon. Let's move on to the Welsh Church Fund Working Group. Regular report members, and we are being presented with a schedule of applications for the Welsh Church from the Welsh Church Funding Group when they met and considered these on the 21st of September. There are only 2 within the schedule. Thanks both. 2 in the schedule, and they are one for Gwydra Football Club, and the recommendation was to award them £1,500 to a sporting facility as representative of the local community. And the second one was for Caldicot Food Bank, and they requested £500 to assist in the provision of provisions for the relief of poverty in the community, and they were awarded £500, which I was pleased to note. And those are the two recommendations. We're asked to endorse those. Colleagues, anybody anything? No? Right, all in favour of agreeing those? Thank you very much. We now have to go to exclude the press and public from the meeting. So if there is anybody watching in, we've got to disconnect you. I don't know about elected members looking in remotely.
If I